Hey guys, Drew in here, and I want to talk today about the dual Dream Paladin. This has become my favorite class in Diablo 2. I never had the chance to build this one when I was a kid playing Diablo 2, 20 years ago, and super excited to get to build it now. I think that this build has at least some characteristics that put it in contention for one of the strongest builds in the game. Paladin is already a pretty overpowered class. Hammerdins are arguably the best class in the entire game, depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. And I think that this dual dream build has a lot going for it. Reasons that you would want to use this instead of a Hammerdin. So first, let's take a look at the skills. So we're going to be putting 1 point all the way up to Redemption. This is just a personal fan favorite for me. Love the Redemption aura. Love being able to flicker it on, flicker it off to full heal either in combat or after combat. Not required for the build to work. Same thing for Vigor, right? Love being able to flicker it on, flicker it off while you're in town or whatnot. Neither of these are required, so you could skip all of these points if you wanted. Max Resist Lightning and Max Salvation, both hard required. So these are the synergies for Holy Shock, which is going to be a huge part of the build's DPS. In the offensive tree, you'll see we don't actually pump any points into Holy Shock, and that's because the 2 dreams give you the Holy Shock that you need. You don't actually have to skill anything into it. So all we're doing in the offensive tree is we're heading all the way over here to Conviction, and you only need 25 points, I think, into Conviction total to get to minus 150 resist all, which is where you want to get to. Every additional point after that just increases the radius and doesn't actually have much of an effect. So I'm 2 points over here. Last time I respect, I just went with different items, and so I put 2 additional points than I needed to. I guess 3 because of Call to Arms, right? I don't have Call to Arms on right now. So you only need to get up to 25 total points in Conviction. And then in the combat skills section, this is going to depend kind of on playstyle and things like that. So I'm a Holy Shield enthusiast, always have been. Love the spell Holy Shield. So I have 10 points. I guess I have 1 point plus another 10 points, so 11 total points in Holy Shield. And then you are going to be using Zeal as your main damage dealer. This is for PVM, so if you're PvPing, Zeal is pretty bad, I would say. So if I were PvPing, I would probably want to max out Smite for melee duels. Also consideration to max out Charge, because it's going to be a large part of your damage in PvP. But for PVM, you're going to be using mostly Zeal. And Zeal gets synergies from Sacrifice. So this is, again, something you can choose, right? Points into Zeal give you more damage and more attack rating, and points into Sacrifice give you more damage. And you get a bigger damage boost from the Sacrifice bonus than you do from hard points into Zeal. So as long as your Zeal gets 5 hits, which I think it does it at rank 5, which with the items that I'm wearing, you'll have automatically, then you're welcome to pump into either one. The build that I'm showcasing right now is a very melee-focused version, more closely aligned with a traditional Zealot. And so the extra damage through Sacrifice is better. If you have Ignore Target's Defense on your weapon, then attack rating doesn't matter in PVM. It only matters in PvP and versus Diablo or Baal. And so Ignore Target's Defense is the reason that I don't think the attack rating on Zeal is necessary. Okay, and then once you have your points allocated, so you have to kind of choose how much you want into Holy Shield versus offenses versus PvP. This is the most flexible part of the build. Once you've chosen, you then need to pump stat points such that when we head on over into the world at large, River of Flames, where I like to go, you want to buff up with Call to Arms, and then you want to buff up with a boosted Holy Shield with Spirit and Call to Arms, so that's +3 to your Holy Shield. So you can see that we're working with level 23 Holy Shield here, and that's 36 successful block. And so you want to make sure you have enough dexterity pumped so that your block hits 75. So you can see that I have 75 block here. Pump enough strength so that you can equip your items. I personally hate having unequipable items. So like relying on Enigma in order to equip your items is something that I just really don't like. So I have enough points to be able to equip my Royal Shield, which is my favorite shield type in the game. You don't have to do that, right? You can put your Enigma in a cloth, in a dust shroud, and then you can use much lower strength rec shields, and then you can have a little bit less strength. Because you're pumping dex in order to get to 75 block, you're easily going to be able to equip phase blades. You're going to have more dex than a phase blade requires, no matter what your gear is. And then the rest of the points go into vitality, right? Super straightforward build, nothing in energy. This does give you a lot of life if you're high level, like my paladin. So then we're moving on to the gear. So there's actually some different considerations here as to what items to use. So we'll go over the things that I think are required first. So the two most important are a Dream Helm and a Dream Shield. And if you're going to play a Paladin, that Dream Shield should be a Paladin Shield because they come with natural all-res. So we have a natural all-res 45 Royal Shield here that rolled pretty well. Got 18 all-res on the Dream roll, and then a 17 all-res Demon Head, my favorite looking helm for this particular build. So these are going to give you your Holy Shock aura, and they stack. So by having two Dreams, you have a level 30 natural Holy Shock aura. You also get bonus points for all skills, plus Paladin skills does not work, plus aura skills does not work. So you can actually test this, right? We can go over here, and we can take my plus offensive auras charm that I have for PvP purposes, and you can see my zeal damage, and it doesn't change, right? So the Holy Shock skill level isn't changing, whereas, I guess I can't really prove it with these charms, because these are, they have a bunch of stats associated with them, and I don't have anything that has all skills easily here. Oh, here we go. So this will change the amount of damage that we do, right? Because you have skills associated with your aura. Okay. So that's kind of the absolute requirement. I personally think if you're going to be doing PVM, then Enigma is also a requirement. So I've played some PVM builds without Enigma, and not a fan. So most of the PVM stuff that I do requires some amount of teleporting. And so this is a pretty hybrid build, right? This is going to get you some melee damage, some lightning damage, and then also take advantage of Enigma. Because you're using Enigma, Arachnid Mesh is also pretty close to required. You need a little bit of faster cast to make Enigma work. If you don't have any faster cast at all, the teleport is really, really slow. And Arachnid Mesh has the benefit of having plus all skills, which is really nice. And then it also slows targets, and your aura will proc that. So lots of reasons to like this belt. I actually think it's one of the better belts for the aura pallies in general, even if you're not teleporting. But the 20 faster cast, super duper important here. And then there are different weapon choices. So there are, I think, 3 different reasonable builds that I've found so far for the Double Dream Zeal Pally. 2 of them use Grief. And so if you're using Grief, what you're doing is you're allocating to split damage build. So now you're doing melee damage and lightning damage, right? You get Holy Shock, adds your lightning damage to your attack. And then Grief is going to cause a ton of physical damage to happen. And so you can support that in various ways. So High Lord's Wrath is a good way to support it. And Grief naturally has 40% IAS on it. The Zeal Breakpoint to care about is either below 40% or 72%. So 72% is a big breakpoint for Zealots, which means that any Grief that has 32% or more IAS is perfectly fine. They're all exactly the same because IAS comes from other slots in chunks of 20. And so if you're going to hit that next breakpoint, you can do it with a 32 IAS Grief just as well as a 40 IAS Grief. So that's not a very important stat. 31, big difference, right? A 31 IAS Grief sucks because then you can't hit the Zeal breakpoint. So I use High Lords. Again, all skills is very useful here. 20 IAS combines to get that last Zeal breakpoint for this particular version of the build. Although I use High Lords for basically all of my builds because I think it's just a really good amulet for this particular setup. And then you get Deadly Strike, which is, again, focused more on the melee side of things. And Lightning Resist is quite useful. Gore Riders is more focused on the melee side. So I would not use this for the less melee-focused ones because you're not doing enough melee damage for the Deadly Strike to matter. But if you're doing a lot of melee damage, especially if you're relying on Leech from melee damage, so that's kind of key. So you'll see I'm not using Drax for this particular build. Having more Deadly Strike is really useful because you'll leech more. So gloves here, you have to have Mana Stolen. some amount, right? It doesn't really matter how much because Zeal is so cheap at 2 mana cost, but you have to have some amount of mana stolen in order to make the build work. And so with these gloves, it allows me to use this ring. I don't have a super high life stolen dual leech ring, and you need quite a bit of life stolen to support this build's melee nature without Drac Grasp. So this is the only way I was able to hit the 72 IAS breakpoint for Zeal, which is about a 25% increase in damage. So it's pretty meaningful. And so what you'll see is that I'm able to support myself using just this 11 life stolen ring as my only source of life leech, because I'm using a bunch of focused towards melee things, and my mercenary is using Reaper's Toll. So Reaper's Toll is super duper important for this particular type of the build. I was actually unable to make this build work before getting Reaper's Toll. So without Decrepify, you just don't do enough melee damage to leech well at 11% leech in Chaos Sanctuary or some of the harder parts of Baal runs, which is what we're going to be doing on Players 8 with this character. So this is one kind of very unique version, right? I would prefer to have a ring that had 11 life stolen or 10 life stolen and mana leech. And then what you would want to do is you would want to use Laying on Hands, right? Laying on Hands is by far the best melee gloves in the game. 350% damage to demons is a huge deal. You get the 20% IAS, and then you just get a free 50% fire resist, which is also super useful. But for now, this is the build that I'm using. So dual leech ring would be better here, and then you could use Laying on Hands here. And then Ravenfrost, right? Always use Ravenfrost on your melees. Never a reason not to. The swap is Call to Arms, right? This is a very medium Call to Arms. And with Spirit's kind of important here, actually, because you're going to swap to teleport a lot of the time, because with the 35 faster cast rate on Spirit, you hit another cast rate breakpoint, and so your teleport is faster. Pretty important for Chaos runs, specifically. Charm's pretty straightforward. Geeds, attack rating and life, all res, Annie, Hellfire, and then some Magic Find stuff, and some life and res, life, attack rating. Like, this is just all life, res, attack rating, and Magic Find. That's like the whole set of charms. One thing to note that you'll notice in this particular build, no skillers. So skillers don't really work for this particular setup. Like, they're just not very effective, right? If you use combat skillers, then you're going to be boosting just your Zeal damage, which is fine, but a lot of your damage comes from lightning. Using offensive aura skillers doesn't affect your Holy Shock because it's coming from items, and using defensive aura skillers doesn't do anything because these are synergies instead of actual points, or instead of actual skills you use. So you don't get a lot of benefit from skillers for this build. So all small charms is the way to go. Some of the other versions of this build that one might want to use. So this is a little bit more advanced because it requires the Reaper's Toll. So before I kind of got to this phase, I was using a Drax Grasp plus a random 3/3 dual leech ring. So this is basically my mana leech. And then Drax has life stolen plus life tap, which is super duper important. And once you have this kind of life leech going on, so you have life tap, you no longer need Gore Riders. And so you can use something like Inferno Stride to better tank fire, or War Traps for more Magic Find, or Sandstorm Trek. They're all perfectly fine. And then for the Merc, we want to use something like Insight, right? You could also use, if you're very rich, you could use Infinity, and then you could use a Fanaticism on your main Paladin. Or you can use an Act 1 Merc with Faith with Fanaticism. Those are both options. I think the third really good idea is to use Doom in a Thresher. These are all pretty expensive, so I don't have these to showcase. Doom would give your Merc Frozen Aura. So you'll see that I'm using the Might Merc. Super important, right? You're doing a bunch of melee damage. You want Might. Fortitude and Dariel's Visage, really straightforward Merc stuff. The third build is much different. Still requires Drax. So this is like the safest setup. So you lose the breakpoint for IAS, and there's no way to get it back. So the High Lords, you can squeeze anything, squeeze Maras or just a random Paladin, like random Mana Leech Amulet, something like that. But this is really safe. You're doing a bunch of grief damage with Life Tap, and Life Tap makes you invincible to almost everything. The third build uses Crescent Moon. So I for sure thought this would be a meme, right? I equipped this Crescent Moon thinking like, there's no possible way that it's going to be competitive with Grief. It's such a low damage weapon, and minus 35 lightning res can't matter that much. It turns out this build's pretty good, actually. The build is pretty strong. So by using Crescent Moon, you shift a ton of your damage away from doing melee damage, and you shift it towards doing more lightning damage. So there are certain mobs that get a lot harder to kill, like things that are lightning immune even when under Conviction Aura. But you do way better AoE damage this way because your aura pulses for AoE damage and the weapon pulses for static field. So I'll showcase all of them in some videos so you can see the different ways to do it. I have settled, now that I'm able to hit that breakpoint like this, I have settled with the Grief build as being the most enjoyable to play and the kind of the strongest overall, especially once I'm able to switch to laying on hands after I get a good enough ring. But it's good to note that the Grief is actually optional. So the build works just fine. You do have to use Drax. It's not possible to leech enough without the fizz damage from Grief, without the Drax Grasp. Once you do proc Life Tap, though, you're back to being invincible, right? Back to being invincible. So that's kind of the build setup as I've found it to work so far. And next we're going to go through some Players 8 content and actually see why one would want to actually use this build. So Hammerdins exist. So what's the selling point of the Double Dream Zealot? All right, first on the list, we will do some Players 8 Chaos Sanctuary Seal Trick. So this is my very favorite of all PVM farming strategies. So I'm on multiplayer, forgive me, no Players 8 setting, gonna have to join a Baal run. So the idea here is that we teleport straight to the seals. So this is, again, not using Enigma, not really an option, right? So you can see that, you know, without having Drax Grasp, it can be a little bit challenging to leech enough. You saw me kind of take some damage there. But because I have Reaper's Toll on my Merc, as soon as Decrepify procs, my damage with my high allocation to Sacrifice and the skill tree and Boar Riders, High Lords, and the highest breakpoint are enough that they'll allow me to do enough physical damage to leech pretty well even in Chaos, where things are pretty leech resistant. Baal runs are actually easier on the leech. So you can see here, you know, Fanaticism mobs are pretty painful, but my Merc slowing him down, pretty useful. Is that Desist? Wow, he really trucked it. So the idea with a Chaos Sanctuary Seal Pop trick is you're supposed to pop all three seals that create bosses, plus one of the fourth seals, and then you want to not pop the fifth seal, teleport to the beginning of the map, teleport back to the seal, and pop it. And this will spawn all of the monsters, and they'll all die when you pop the seal. So you'll get to see me do it here in just a sec. This requires having enough faster cast rate. So this is part of the reason that I think Arachnid Mesh is such an incredibly important piece of this puzzle. And again, Enigma, right? You can't do this without teleport. So you could do it with like a Naj's Puzzler, but it would be like wildly expensive, just insanely expensive. So I think having Arachnid plus an Enigma is super important. So the point of doing this is to get runes, by the way. Also, my point in Redemption, very useful here. I do not have enough mana, right, 852, to support constant teleporting with nothing to leech off of. And so Redemption's very useful for this. And so you can see we can also easily kill Diablo, right? The build does plenty of damage. So even though I only have 2,421 Zeal attack rating, doesn't matter, right? Decrepify is a hell of a thing. So next game. So this is, I believe, the best run in the game. I'm not going to make the claim that you should use a Double Dream Zealot for this particular run. I think Hammerdins are the best in the game at this run. I don't actually think it's all that close. You know, my significantly less well-geared Hammerdin is better at doing this. The reason you would use this build is, one, Hammerdins are incredibly boring. I've played Hammerdins for thousands and thousands of hours, and it's just not very fun compared to some of the other builds in the game. So that's one reason. The other is what we'll do right after this run, which is Players 8 Baal runs solo. So unlike Chaos Sanctuary, where I think it's hard to argue that any build competes with Hammerdins. In Players 8 Chaos or Players 8 Baal runs, I actually think this build's better. I think Hammerdins actually aren't very good for Players 8 solo Baal. You know, obviously they can do it. Hammerdins can do anything in the game. That's why it was one of the best classes. But I don't think that they're particularly efficient at it. The way that Worldstone 2 and Worldstone 3 are set up is just not a very good setup for Hammerdins, the way that they kind of do damage. And then the fact that the second wave of Baal's minions is a bunch of things that are immune to hammer. It's not a deal breaker, right? You can still kill them. You can use Holy Bolt and you can use your Merc to kill them all, but it's just awful. Like, it's just a horrible experience. It feels terrible. You have to be pretty careful against these Fanatic guys. They can kill you and your Merc pretty quickly. I turn on Walk so that I don't accidentally run past them and insta-die to a bunch of fanaticismed attacks. Dying at this amount of XP into level 95 is not ideal, right? Not ideal. It sets you back. It sets you back a lot of time. One of the another reason that I think this build, despite how attractive it is to use something like Fortitude as your armor, Reaper's Toll has a really small radius for Decrepify, and being able to reposition your Mercenary using Teleport is kind of pivotal. Like, I just don't think it actually works very well to use this build without it. So you see I killed the last boss, we teleport here, and we're doing this at a quick enough clip that they're not finishing their Baal run by the time we're finishing our Chaos Sanctuary run, and so we were able to kind of keep this alive. Keep this going, which is really the speed you need to be able to maintain. Like, if you can't maintain this speed, then your build is not efficient enough to, at least for online play. So for single player play, it doesn't actually matter how long it takes you, because you can just set things to player 8 and then go for it. This strategy does not work super well in Players 1, because in Players 1, all of these monsters that you kill via the seals, they don't actually count your magic find. They only count the number of players in the game to determine drops. So they're really good for farming runes, which is what I'm doing. So I've found a bunch of jaw, a bunch of burr from doing this over time. Really good for finding runes. Really bad for finding other items, though. And so if you're not in Players 8, the rate is pretty low. So I would say this is not a super good thing to do in Players 1. So that is the run, and we will switch over to Baal runs now. All right, so we're going to give some Baal runs a try here. Baal runs are much harder to find good game chains for. So for Chaos Sanctuary clearing by yourself, it's not that hard, because you just find a Baal chain, right? And then you can be the one clearing Chaos while they clear Baal. For Baal runs, you can find a Chaos chain, right? Which is what I did. So this is a Chaos chain. And it sometimes works, but Chaos is much faster than solo Baal. So oftentimes I won't be able to clear Baal in time. So what I'll do is I'll showcase some of the ways in which I think this character is pretty good at farming these zones. So Hammerdins struggle a lot here. This is the main reason you would come to Worldstone 2, is these little fetishes are like loot pinatas on Players 8 difficulty. These snakes are especially difficult for Hammerdins, and you can see that they're extremely trivial for this paladin. Like, not at all even remotely difficult. There are also some other mob types that are hard for Hammerdins to handle. So the idea is to find these groups and then just stand still and zeal over and over again. And one of the nice things about this build is that your aura will actually kill large groups of mobs very quickly. So it's like having AoE damage, even though you're a melee character. And so this is, I think, one of the most efficient farming builds, like one of the most efficient farming paths in the game. I think 8-player Chaos is the best for loot. This is the best for XP. So let's go Chaos Man, 14, join. All right. So let's try a full Baal run. So this time I'll skip all the trash and we'll go straight to Baal, which is another thing that I think this build absolutely excels at. And again, couldn't do it without teleport, right? Gotta have teleport if you're gonna do skips. So Worldstone 2. and we'll hopefully get some quick exits because again we're racing against the clock here. Right? They're gonna clear pretty quick. So this would normally be a mob setup that I would skip. Not super interested in fighting against those lightning beetles. Totally doable, right? There's no mobs that you can't do with this build because you really are truly split damage. You have both the damage from your lightning aura and the damage from melee. These are mobs I would certainly not skip. So like rooms like this, right? This is like the pit on steroids. Like this is so much total loot. So you'll see that those little ranged fetishes would be extremely tedious to kill on a hammered in. But here we just kill everything else and they die for free. They're just free loot to the aura. It's really nice. You know, these are lightning immune skeletons. Like a whole bunch of them just died over here. There's like more loot on this screen than I can even come close to like actually seeing. Anyway, so that's an example of kind of why I think this particular build is, there's a true competitive advantage. It's not just hammered-ins are boring, I want to do something that's not a hammered-in. I think this is an actual advantage, is being able to do Worldstone 2, Worldstone 3. Burning Souls are another one that are extremely tedious on a hammered-in. Super easy to do on this build. Like, absolutely no problem whatsoever. So you can see teleport, right, being super useful here. Really easy to clear those guys. You can clear this whole space, actually, is pretty good farming. So Worldstone 4, I guess, Throne. And then all of the waves are pretty easy, right? It's not that hard. Baal takes forever. I generally don't recommend people actually killing Baal in their Players 8 Baal runs because Baal himself just is like, oh my god, he's so tedious. There's so much life. So this right here is what takes hammered-ins a billion years because these mobs are immune to magic, and so you have to kill them with your mercenary dealing damage combined with you casting Holy Bolt. And you can see instead I was able to melee them down, and at the same time the aura killed all of the trash, so you didn't have to go chase down the individual trash mobs, which I think is really nice. These guys are a little bit annoying for your merc. You got to be a little bit careful. If you kill all of them and your merc no longer has things to leech and all of the hydras are spawned, your merc will die. So I always teleport away, wait for the laugh, teleport back, collect loot. These guys, no problem at all. You can see that I have max fire and max lightning resist. I've not found cold resist to be super important, so I don't really care. Same with poison resist. But with max fire resist, these guys just don't do enough damage. There's no lower resist curse like there is in Chaos, so you don't have to be careful. And then for this last wave, just for efficiency's sake, oh, we came so close. So the run ended, and we didn't quite get to the wave that we wanted to. Right, this is the most XP is this wave, so you really want to get here. You want to be behind the torches, because then Baal won't debuff you. So unfortunately, we just missed it. There we go, 15. My bad. But that's it, right? That's a full Baal run, Players 8 Baal run, in the middle of someone else's Chaos run. And we finished Baal, the part of the Baal run that matters, at about the same speed, right? If we hadn't taken that quick detour to clear that amazing farm room, you know, we would have been able to complete the whole thing. So this is another thing that's pretty interesting about this build. Absolutely no issues with these ghosts. So these ghosts are normally just absolutely atrocious for people. They kill so many people in Baal rushing. And because you naturally have 85% lightning res, so maxing the lightning res defensive aura, even though if you don't use it, it just passively gives you 10 max lightning res. And so using that 10 max lightning res, you become very difficult to kill by those particular mobs. So without Insight, I don't have enough mana to be able to infinitely teleport. I like using Insight for that reason. Like it's just a nice quality of life perk. But Reaper's Toll is so much damage, I couldn't justify using Insight over Reaper's Toll. So this would be another mob type that's traditionally very hard, right? These Stygians. Not very hard for this build. They don't do anything actually. They all die to your aura, right? So you can see I'm just standing here. I'm not even doing anything special. And they all super easy died, right? So yeah, really big fan of how incredibly resilient this build is, right? It's super tanky, so it's very forgiving. I don't know that it's sufficiently forgiving that I'd play it on hardcore. You know, it's very expensive to play on hardcore, but it is so forgiving in softcore. You know, you can see that I'm level 95, and you know, halfway through level 95, and I've done all of that solo. So that's 100% solo XP. I don't ever do group Baal runs or group chaos runs, and you know, it's just because you can do that stuff, and you know, my rate of death is very low. Right, I've died a total of 2 times this level, and yeah, that's because the build is very strong. So yeah, I think that's the main reason one would want to play this build, is being able to do this solo Baal runs in players 8 difficulty, which is both good loot and of course the best XP in the game. Right, this is where all the XP in the game comes from, doing Baal runs. I don't do group Baal runs, mostly because they're super boring, but also because you don't get any loot. People pick up all the loot, and I hate it. I like getting loot. This is a loot game, so I like doing runs where I can get something good, right? Where the chance of getting something good exists. So I think that's kind of it. I'll try and showcase the Crescent Moon variant, because it's definitely different. It has some pros and some cons. I think this is the best of the builds, the kind of small variant builds that I've found. But I do recognize that, you know, it's very expensive, and Reaper's Toll, and, you know, not everybody has a ethereal Reaper's Toll and stuff like that, and you do need to be able to keep your Merc alive. So once again, we didn't quite make it to the last wave, which is unfortunate, right? We would love to be able to kill that last wave on players 8 difficulty, but you know, that's just not how it worked out. So this chaos run was a little too fast. Ideally, you want to find a cows run. Cows runs are the way to go for players 8 difficulty. We'll kill Baal here, and then yeah, call that a video. So hopefully this was enjoyable. You know, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I love answering questions. But this is my favorite build in Diablo 2. I think it's amazingly fun. Should be noted, you can actually PvP with it. It's very hard to PvP with this build. There's a lot of classes that are difficult to kill as you're doing lightning damage, and there's a lot of classes that are pretty close to invincible lightning. But you know, it is doable. I have done a lot of PvP with it, and I think it's at least competitive. Cool.